Hello everyone, welcome to One Story Channel. Today, we continue sharing from the book Conversations with God. This is a dialogue between an ordinary man and God, a profound conversation of the soul that reveals the truth about good and evil, the meaning of life, and the constant connection between God and humanity. Please take a moment, calm your mind, and follow our story as we embark on Neale Donald Walsch's extraordinary spiritual journey and experience this life-changing conversation. Neale Donald Walsch never imagined that one day his life would take such a dramatic turn. His life, like many others, had its moments of success, failure, excitement, and disappointment, but at a certain point, he felt as though he had hit a dead end. What he faced was not the usual life struggles but a deeper spiritual crisis. He wanted to know, what is the meaning of life? Why do I feel so lost? And does the God I seek truly exist? It was a bright and sunny afternoon, and Neale was sitting alone at his desk. He looked around, feeling an inexplicable sense of loneliness. Despite his rich life experiences and the many lessons he had learned, at that very moment, a sense of emptiness enveloped his soul, one that he could not easily shake off. He had been searching for something, perhaps a meaning beyond the material world, or perhaps an inner peace. But no matter what, he could not escape the deep question lurking in his heart. Where is God? I've been looking for you, Neale murmured quietly, as if speaking to himself, or perhaps to an invisible presence. He closed his eyes and began to pray silently, hoping that somehow, from the silent universe, he might receive a response. Yet, as always, his prayer seemed to vanish into thin air, like a stone dropped into an endless sea, without creating even the smallest ripple. But just as Neale was about to give up and stand up to leave, a faint but firm voice suddenly echoed from deep within him. It didn't seem to come from outside but rose directly from his heart. You've been searching for me, haven't you? Neale froze. He lifted his head and looked around the room, which remained completely silent without any unusual sounds or movements. The voice was too real, yet it didn't seem to belong to the external world. He closed his eyes again, now filled with uncertainty. What is this? Am I losing my mind? However, the voice spoke again, this time clearer. I've always been here. You've never left me. Neale held his breath. He had never heard such a real and deep inner voice before. It was warm and calm, as if it had pierced through all his defenses and reached the deepest part of his soul. Who are you? Neale finally gathered the courage to ask, even though he felt he might already know the answer. I am what you have been searching for. I am God, the voice calmly and confidently replied. Neale's mind was in turmoil. God? How could he, an ordinary man, truly have a conversation with God? His entire life's faith and teachings told him that God was above, distant in the heavens, and only through prayer and worship could one come close to him, but never through direct communication like this. This can't be, Neale murmured, almost unable to believe it. I'm just an ordinary person. Why would God choose to talk to me? The voice was gentle and full of understanding. Why do you believe that only special people can speak to me? I am not just far away in the heavens. I am in the heart of every person. I am everywhere. It's just that you've never realized it. Neale felt his inner doubts gradually dissolve, but at the same time, he couldn't shake a sense of unease. He had always been taught to pray and worship God in a certain way, to believe that God was holy and dignified. But now, this voice seemed so close, speaking to him like a friend. You know, Neale tentatively said, some people would consider this kind of conversation blasphemous, especially if you reveal yourself so casually. The voice of God chuckled softly, a sound filled with warmth and kindness. Why do you think I cannot laugh? Do you think I can only reveal myself in one way? Humanity has placed me inside a narrow box, believing that I can only exist in a solemn and reverent form. In fact, I am in every corner, every moment. I am joy and sorrow. I am sweetness and bitterness. Behind every event lies a divine purpose, and you only need to learn how to see it. A new feeling began to emerge in Neale's heart, one that was both unfamiliar and yet somehow familiar. He had never imagined God would communicate with him in such a kind and personal way. The notion of divine no longer seemed to require solemnity or distance. So, you're saying you've always been by my side? Neale hesitantly asked. Yes, God replied, I am constantly with you. I communicate with you in many ways, through your feelings, your intuition, and even through the events that happen around you. But humans often ignore these signals. You are more inclined to trust the external world than the voice within. Neale felt a shock in his heart. He thought back on his life, and indeed, there were many times when he felt an invisible force guiding him, but he had never really paid attention or believed that it was God's voice. But, Neale continued, why is it that sometimes I don't feel your presence? Sometimes I feel so alone, as if the entire universe has abandoned me. God's voice was soft and filled with understanding. When you feel lonely, that is when you are closest to me. Loneliness is not a sign that you've been abandoned. It is the deepest call of your soul. That feeling tells you that I've always been by your side, but you haven't used your heart to feel it. You are searching with your mind, not your heart. Let go of the mind's analysis and doubts. Open your heart, and you will find that I have never left. Neale took a deep breath. He recalled those moments of loneliness, those times when he felt abandoned and forgotten. Now he understood that those moments weren't signs of separation from God but the strongest call from his inner self. He realized that he had been using logic to search for God, ignoring the emotions in his heart. So, you're saying that as long as I trust my heart and those subtle intuitions, I will be able to hear your voice? Neale asked. Yes, God replied. I speak to you through your heart. Your inner voice is me communicating with you. When you learn to fully trust it, you'll find that every step in life is guided by me. You don't need to fear getting lost because I am always with you. Neale remained silent for a moment. He knew it wouldn't be easy. His entire life had taught him that God was distant, unreachable, and now he had to learn to believe that God was within him. This was a tremendous shift for him. I've always been afraid of making wrong decisions, afraid of taking the wrong path, Neale confessed. I fear that if I make a mistake, God will punish me. God's voice was soothing and comforting. You don't need to be afraid. You won't make the wrong decision because, in my eyes, there is no wrong path. Every road leads to me. All of your choices, whether you consider them right or wrong, are simply ways for you to experience and understand yourself. You don't need to fear punishment because I will never punish you. I am love, and love never punishes. It was as though a weight had been lifted off Neale's heart. He had never heard such reassuring words before. In the past, he had been taught that God was a just judge who would evaluate every person's actions, but now God was telling him that there was no such thing as right or wrong, only choices and experiences. Then how will I know if the choices I make are the right ones? Neale asked, still somewhat confused. You don't need to worry about whether a choice is right or wrong, God replied. Every choice has its own value. You simply need to follow your heart and make the choice that feels right to you. Even if you later discover that the choice brings challenges, that too is part of your growth and learning. Every choice brings you deeper understanding and leads you closer to me. Neale nodded. He began to understand what God meant. Every choice in life, whether seemingly small or significant, was part of his soul's journey. Those choices he had once considered mistakes were simply steps in his self-exploration. There were no mistakes, only experiences and growth. You say you won't punish me, but what about those evil actions? Neale suddenly thought. Like people such as Hitler, who did so many terrible things, wouldn't he be punished? God's answer was unexpected. Hitler also went to heaven. Neale's heart skipped a beat. He could hardly believe what he had heard. His upbringing had taught him that someone like Hitler would be condemned and punished by God for eternity. How is that possible? Neale could barely believe it. He did so many horrific things, caused so much death and suffering. How could he possibly go to heaven? God's voice remained calm. In the eyes of humanity, Hitler's actions were extreme and even evil. But in my eyes, he is also my creation. His soul was not abandoned by me. I do not punish any soul because every soul is on its own journey, and in the end, all souls return to me. What Hitler did was part of the experiences of certain souls. Through the things he did, others learned deep lessons about good and evil. It is through evil that you come to understand good. Neale sank deep into thought. God's words overturned everything he had ever known about good and evil. He had always believed that God would harshly judge those who did evil deeds, but now he was beginning to see that perhaps God's perspective was far beyond human moral judgments. Good and evil were not absolute opposites but rather relative experiences. So, are you saying that what we call evil is also part of God? Neale asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Yes, God answered. Evil is simply how humans define actions that are out of harmony with their inner selves. But even those actions, from my perspective, serve a purpose. Through what you call evil, you learn compassion, forgiveness, and love. Without evil, you would never fully understand what good is. They are all part of the experience of life. Neale felt that his soul was undergoing a profound transformation. He had never considered that good and evil could be viewed from such a different perspective. He began to realize that the moments of pain and confusion in life that he had once deeply resented were, in fact, opportunities for learning and growth. Then how should I deal with those things I believe to be evil? Neale asked. God's response was filled with wisdom. You don't need to fear them. You can choose to stay away from them, but do so without fear or hatred, and instead with understanding and forgiveness. You must understand that every experience has its divine purpose. You can live the life you believe is right, but don't confront those who differ from you with anger or hostility. Approach the world with love and understanding, and you will find that your heart will grow more peaceful. Neale nodded. He felt the fear and confusion in his heart slowly dissipating. Although he still had many questions, he was beginning to understand that every experience in life, whether painful or joyful, was part of God's plan to help him better understand himself. I understand, Neale said. From now on, I will trust my heart, follow its guidance, and no longer fear making choices. God smiled. This is the only request I have of you. Trust your own heart, for that is how I speak to you. When you learn to trust yourself, your life will be filled with love, light, and miracles. Neale felt an unprecedented peace wash over him. He knew that this conversation with God would forever change his life. He was no longer afraid, no longer confused, and no longer doubtful. He finally understood that life itself is a sacred journey, and every moment carries deep meaning. From that moment on, Neale walked into the future with this newfound wisdom. He knew that no matter what challenges he faced, the voice within would always guide him forward. And that voice was God speaking directly to him. Thank you for listening to this episode of Conversations with God. Throughout this journey of wisdom and revelation, we have learned that the answers we seek are not in the distant heavens, but within our hearts. God is always with us, guiding us through the voice inside. No matter the confusion or challenges you may face in life, trust that the voice within is your most reliable guide. Please stay tuned for our next episode. We look forward to sharing more stories with you. May love and light accompany you on every step of your journey.